Good day. I'm Andrea Spindle, Executive Director of the Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation and co-chair of End Jew Hatred Canada. Welcome to today's web talk with Dr. Charles Jacobs, entitled The Failure of Jewish Leadership, What is to be Done?, which is a topic that relates to our new series entitled Challenges for Jews Today. CAEF is a registered charitable organization and as such relies on support from donors and volunteers. You can be both. If you support our work, please donate. If you are engaged in the struggle to confront and end Jew hatred, to support Israel's right to exist, to teach truth over lies and confront the liars, and to stand up as a proud Jew and proud Zionist, please be in touch with me via email at Andrea, A-N-D-R-I-A, @caef.ca. Above all, do not fall into despair, fear, or silence, but step up and be a voice for reason, a voice for Jewish rights. CAEF produces informative webinars featuring experts and allies, and all are posted on our website, www.caef.ca. We produce a weekly bulletin with high priority issues for the Jewish community and actionable items. We do public advocacy, not behind the scenes, and we muster people to direct action to demonstrate for what we believe. If this is of interest, subscribe to our email list. Please be aware that this web talk is being recorded and will be available on our website tomorrow and will be included in the bulletin, which all of you listening today will receive. After Dr. Jacobs speaks, he will take questions, which you may submit on the Q&A function on your Zoom screen. And I encourage you to do that, but use the Q&A function as opposed to the chat. It now gives me a great pleasure to introduce Charles Jacobs, who will speak to a topic that is probably on the minds of all who registered as we are living through a wave of rising anti-Semitism and wondering who is leading the charge to stop it, to reduce or prevent it, to end once and for all the ceaseless, endless cycle of Jew hatred. Can it be ended? Is the oldest hatred simply going through its normal 20 to 50 year cycle, or are North American Jewish leaders up to the challenges? Charles Jacobs is a journalist and longtime social activist who for over 2 decades has co-founded human rights and pro-Israel organizations to deal with unmet challenges. Some of these have become national institutions, such as the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting and Analysis, known as CAMERA, the American Anti-Slavery Group, the David Project, and Americans for Peace and Tolerance. In 1989, responding to widespread media bias against Israel, Charles co-founded with Andrea Levin the Boston branch of CAMERA, which grew in significance and today is the preeminent Middle East Media Watch organization in the United States. In 1993, responding to reports of modern-day human bondage, particularly in Africa, where Arab and Muslims were enslaving African Black people, Charles, along with African Christians and Muslims, founded the American Anti-Slavery Group, which brought international attention to the enslavement of tens of thousands of mostly Christian Africans in Sudan by the militias armed by the genocidal Islamic regime in Khartoum. This aspect of Dr. Jacobs' work will, I hope, have you all thinking about how Black Lives Matters in the US, Canada, and abroad has totally ignored the modern practice of slavery while condemning an inclusive civil rights society of systemic racism. Charles actually flew several times illegally into Sudan on rescue missions that freed thousands of slaves. In September of 2000, Coretta Scott King and Boston Mayor Thomas Menino presented Charles with the first ever Boston Freedom Award for his abolitionist work. The AASG was instrumental in influencing President Bush to change US policy on Sudan and enforcing a North-South peace treaty, which ended the slave raids and created the world's newest state, South Sudan. In the summer of 2002, in response to the sudden emergence of new global anti-Semitism, Charles co-founded the David Project to promote a fair and honest discussion of the Middle East conflict. This evolved into a Center for Jewish Leadership. The David Project currently educates thousands of pro-Israel students each year, preparing them for the rhetorical battles on the nation's campuses. In September of 2008, in response to the threat of Islamic radicalism's rapid penetration of American society, Charles, along with Professor Dennis Hale and Sheikh Ahmed Mansour, founded Americans for Peace and Tolerance. This organization works to expose and challenge radical left and radical Islamic campaigns which threaten America and the Jews. Some of APT's successful campaigns have helped rid MIT and Northeastern University of radical campus imams and demote an anti-Israel scholar at NEU. This work is done in cooperation with the Muslim Reform Movement, which is now recently launched as the Council of Muslims Against Anti-Semitism. Charles has been widely published, including in the New York Times, the Boston Globe, the Jerusalem Post, and the Encyclopedia Britannica, and has appeared on many local and national television and radio broadcasts. And we're extremely thrilled to be able to welcome him today from his home in Boston. Charles.
Thank you, Andrea. That was amazing. Thank you for reading that letter from my mom. Look, this is what we're going to do this afternoon. I'm going to be speaking for about 30 minutes, 35 minutes, after which, as you said, we'll open it up to questions. The webinar was scheduled for an hour, but we can go beyond that if people want to stay a bit. Finally, after I give you all of the sobering news and analysis, I do offer a plan for what we can do, so stay tuned. So this is a thematic presentation to help us understand how the Jewish community got to be in the situation, the awful situation in which we now find ourselves. If we don't understand how we got here, I can't imagine that we could know what to do about getting out of this. My focus is on the American Jewish community, but you'll see that parallels to Canada and Europe will ring loud and deep. So here we go. The situation for Jews today in the West is quite serious. Everywhere we are under ideological and increasingly physical assault. Many Jews are in shock. America was supposed to be the Golden Medina, the Golden Land. It was said it could never happen here, but something very bad is happening here. Over the last few years, Jews have been murdered and assaulted on America's streets. Jewish buildings have been stormed with gunfire. Even before this latest surge of Jew hatred coming from the Gaza war propaganda, crimes against Jews were already more than 60% of crimes against all religious targets. Crimes against Muslims, by comparison, constituted about 15%. Even before the Gaza war, every Jewish building in America required security. That's not the country I grew up in, or we grew up in. Soon, maybe no Jew will think he lives in the Golden Medina. Then did come the Gaza war and its blood libel that Jews in Israel are needlessly killing innocent children, with pictures that supposedly prove it. This defamation is being blared daily from mainstream press and has gone viral on social media. This defamation most recently has led to a slew of physical attacks on Jews in broad daylight. You people in Canada have seen this in Toronto at the Nathan Phillips Square. It's much, much worse in Europe, where caravans of Islamists with Palestinian flags drive slowly through Golders Green, the Jewish quarter in London, for example, where they scream, "F the Jews, and we will rape their daughters." You can also see photos of Jews being beaten in the streets of New York, sometimes daily. There's a slide on that next slide. So as we meet here today, an alliance of left-wing progressives and Muslim anti-Zionists, which we should come to understand and call them a red-green alliance, red for the communists, red for the left, green for the Muslims, is using the scenes of the destruction in Gaza to instill hatred for Israel and its Jewish supporters throughout American society and Canadian society and European society. More and more Americans will be less and less likely to protect and defend the Jews. The Red-Green Alliance is seemingly an anomaly. How can it be that people on the left who are for gender fluidity, for nipple rings and bikinis and free love can unite with, and for LGBT, can unite with people for whom those would be crimes that would get you thrown off the roof or stoned in the Muslim world. Well, it seems illogical, but anti-Semitism has glued in the past many strange things together, and it's glued together now the left, the far left, and the Islamic radicals. The Gaza war now has got us, the Gaza war propaganda has got us to what I think is a tipping point. The status quo is simply unsustainable. I came here to tell you the story of how this happened to us. It's a partial story because there are external causes over which we had no control. The main one, of course, is the defeat of classical liberalism by a force known by many names: postmodernism, progressivism, political correctness, wokeism. That is and has been defeating classical liberals and classical liberalism for the longest time now. And it is happening across Western civilization. It is very bad for the Jews, but that is a topic for another lecture. That's the external threat. Today, I want to concentrate on the problem that was and still is within our power. That is the failure of Jewish leadership. So the ideological war against the Jewish state started in the media and on campuses decades ago. Now, 30 years on, we've lost almost every major cultural and political institution in America. You know, we've lost the media, we've lost the campuses, we've lost the liberal churches, we've lost the high schools, and now we've lost the supportive half of the Democratic Party, the energetic half, the surging half. How did it happen that the Jews, who are supposed to be the best storytellers, the best PR people, the best lawyers and reasoners, how did it happen that we failed to make Israel's case? Daniel Pipes asks it this way. You should remember this quote. Whoever, he said a few years ago, whoever would have imagined 100 years ago that the Jews would make the best soldiers and the Arabs the best publicists? That's what happened. Let's start with the media. Okay, I got thrown off again. Where am I? Let's start with the media. I live in Boston. In 1989, Andrea Levin and I were preparing to launch the Boston branch of CAMERA, Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting in America, to fight the media biased against Israel. The Boston Globe was bashing Israel daily. Here's just one story. So an Arab was carrying a bomb that he was going to throw at Jews. The bomb blew up in his face. He was arrested and convicted. So what was the Boston Globe headline? Israelis convict blind Palestinian. I have a copy of that. I didn't make it up. Andrea Levin wrote a terrific column about the Boston Globe, covering it broadly and documenting every one of, or many of, the horrible things that it was doing. She's terrific. And we were about to launch the Boston branch of a media watchdog, CAMERA. Suddenly, however, we were approached by two very important people close to the ADL. One's name is Lenny Zakem. There's a Zakem Bridge in Boston who's named after him. And the other was Steve Grossman, who was at one point Secretary of State or the Treasury in Massachusetts. He was a leader in AIPAC nationally. They came to us, they said, don't do it. Don't do this Boston branch of a media watchdog. Let the ADL take it on. And here was their quote, let the ADL be the ADL for Israel. Why? Because they said, if it was the ADL that told the world that the New York Times and the Boston Globe and the Washington Post and the LA Times were cheating on the Jewish state, that would really matter, because they speak, the ADL speaks in the name of America's Jews, which was true, and we agreed. And we were prepared to work with the ADL, but let them have this as a important mission. But the ADL's head, Abe Foxman, you can now go to the next slide with Abe Foxman if you're not there. He declined. And I suppose he declined because he needed his letters to be published in the New York Times. He couldn't afford to be calling them out and get his letters published. I guess he didn't want to upset his donors, many of whom were older Holocaust survivors and could only think of anti-Semitism as coming from the Nazis. Many of his donors might have been on the left, happy to fight Nazis, but also happy that Israel was being hectored a bit, to make it a better place and all. Whatever the reasons, Abe Foxman didn't do it. So that was the new anti-Semitism. The new anti-Semitism is making Israel the Jew among nations. We'll get to that in a minute. But I want to posit to you today, people who write about American Jewish history will recognize this choice that Foxman made was the exact moment that the American Jewish community's power and influence began to decline. ADL's decision not to speak in the name of the Jewish community against the Jewry's biggest defamers at the time, the mainstream media, which trumpeted lies and slanders daily. The minute that they refused to say that to the American public, from the voice of the Jewish community, that the media were lying about the Jews, that moment in time marked the beginning of the decline of American Jewish fortunes. That was 1989. Now, meanwhile, I see that Foxman is much in the news. He announced that he canceled his subscription when he saw that picture that we had as the other slide, which was the New York Times blood libel that the Jews are killing innocent Palestinian children needlessly. So he canceled his subscription. Well, that was good, but it was 35 years late. He also told the New York Times, he also told the Times of Israel, David Horowitz, who's the editor of the Times of Israel, did a long interview with Foxman just a few days ago. And Foxman says, the problem for us now is that Israel has no vision. The fact of the matter is that it was Foxman who had no vision. So that's when our Defense Department, the ADL, as you know, is the American Jewish Defense Department. In every Jewish city, we have federations, which were supposed to be kind of the welfare department of the Jewish community. They were collecting money from the left and the right to help out with parv, non-political communal needs, take care of Safta in the old age home. So they were not the warriors. They were not the warriors. The ADL was the warriors, and they withdrew from the battlefield. And a vacuum was created at that moment, very soon after 1989. And what happened was, wonderful Jewish activists, some of the best people that we have, tried to fill the void by creating new organizations. They tried to stick their fingers in a dike as best they could. But as we see today, they could not hold back the flood of Jew hatred. Try as they might, and valiantly try as they might, we are not winning. After CAMRA, which is an immensely important and wonderful organization, then came the David Project, Stand With Us, Hasbara Fellows, and many more. And think Doc Emmett, film productions, Gloria Greenfield makes incredibly good films. If you haven't seen them, you have to see them. ZOA was always there, even before. Mort Klein is the one national Jewish leader who has no problem saying the truth about this. What's he say the truth about? Everything about Israel, but most very important, he says he has the guts, the courage to say that Jewish leaders are trying to, are failing to protect us, and Jewish leaders are trying to shut him up because of that. He's not allowed, we are not allowed to criticize Jewish leaders who are failing. Meanwhile, every Jewish leader thinks they have the right to criticize the elected representatives of the Jewish state. We can't criticize them, but they can criticize people who were actually elected. They were not elected. They're anointed by the donors. And so they're insisting that we not criticize them. It's pathetic. AIPAC 2, of course, was always there, but its mission was not to fight anti-Semitism. Its mission was to lobby Congress to support Israel. The defending the community was the chief and should have been the only mission of the very well-funded, today they have $100 million a year, ADL, which was now been taken over by a former Obama consultant, Jonathan Greenblatt, who has turned our Defense Department, the Defense Department of the Jewish people, into a Defense Department of the Democratic Party. For shame. I have to notice also, Greenblatt, after this most recent spate of attacks on Jews in New York, got on television and said, I'm scared, I'm frightened. That's not the way a leader should act. Next, so uncontested in the media in any serious way by America's most powerful Jewish leaders, anti-Israelism moved onto the campuses. In 2004, let me get back to my, okay. Avi Goldwasser, who is my partner in all of the activities that I do, whose films many of you have seen, and you should see them all, and I'll send them to Andrea, went with me to meet secretly with Jewish students who asked for the meeting at Columbia University. They told us that they were being harassed and intimidated by their professors in class whenever they challenged anti-Israel lectures or readings or assignments. We were horrified by what they told us. So we went to the ADL, do something, nothing. We went to David Harris, who is a man I admire because he's probably one of the most eloquent, if not the most eloquent senior Jewish leaders at this time. But we went to him. He heads the American Jewish Committee. And we said, look what's happening. And we showed him film clips and we told them about what the kids were going through at Columbia University. And he said point blank to us, but we don't do campuses. We do diplomacy. Well, in a generation or two, he would be having to deal with the diplomats poisoned on the campuses that he didn't do. Jewish students were shocked when they came to the campuses. They were totally unprepared and undefended. They were unprepared to deal with the anti-Israel arguments and anti-Israel forces that they met on campuses. There is a slide where we have lots of arrows on both sides. I think that was there, the campuses. So this is the force field of how it works on the campuses, how you can win or how you can lose when you have a battle on college campuses. So college administrators perhaps are the most cowardly officials in America. And without pressure from our own leaders, they simply bowed to the forces arrayed against them. And here are all of the forces on the college campuses arrayed against us. The professoriate, the leftist student groups, the media, the Black and Latino radicals, communists, the Muslim student groups, the Arab student groups. All of those were making it very painful for any administrator to defend the Jewish rights to stand up for Israel, to defend free speech. These are all well-funded and very, very well organized. And you can imagine you would have to be a hero, college administrator, to take on that fight. And if you weren't being supported by the Jewish community, which you were not, we went and we begged them to come and help the students and to make this a public fight. They didn't want to make it a public fight. The ADL and the federations and the JCRCs, they didn't want to make it a public fight. You know why? Because they were afraid it would be said about them that they were against academic freedom. So rather than stick up for the Jewish students, they left the Jewish students, the bravest of the brave Jewish students, all alone on college campuses against an onslaught. And there were no heroes. I mean, maybe once in a while somebody did a heroic thing in terms of an administrator on college campuses. I didn't see much of that. I didn't see much of that. Of course, later, when things really got bad, the Jewish establishment did fund the training of Jewish students. We got money from the David Project from some of these groups, some of these establishment groups, not many. But again, the students were the ones that they let be alone on the campuses with their training. Avi Goldwasser made a film called Columbia Unbecoming. Please Google it. We interviewed the students on campus who described that they were being bullied. And we thought that that film would wake up the Jewish community. That was 2004. We sent it all over. We begged. We went to rich Jewish donors who also happened to be on the board of Columbia University, and they felt too conflicted to do much except to speak behind the scenes. Nobody wanted to make this onslaught against Jewish students and pro-Israel students, not just Jewish, by the way, mostly, but there are others who are not Jewish and pro-Israel. This onslaught again, nobody wanted to make war. Nobody wanted to fight. And now, that was 2004. We tried to wake them up. A few woke up. Nobody big woke up. Some donors woke up. Now the situation is 100 times worse. I fear that after the Gaza war now, Jewish students will not only be shut up, but they will be attacked on campus. Next, the next thing that happened, I'm telling you this through kind of a Boston angle, but it is a national story because everything I'm telling you happened in every city. Here's a Boston example. I know it happened in almost every city. Hamas comes to Boston to establish a base. There's a picture of a mosque there, I think is next. Right, that's the Boston Mega Mosque. It's the largest mosque on the East Coast, even bigger than the one in Manhattan. So we found out, they set up shop in Boston. We found out who ran it, who funded it. It was an Islamist group pretending to be moderate Muslims. And they created the largest mosque on the Eastern Seaboard in Roxbury, Massachusetts, in the black area, next to the black area. On their board is a man named Yusuf Karadari, who at the time was, and still may be, the spiritual head of the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, the Muslim Brotherhood wants all the Jews killed. And if you would just click on Yusuf Karadari, you could see videos of him talking to throngs of Muslims in Cairo, in Syria, in Iraq, telling them that all the Jews have to be killed. And here's the guy who's going to be on the board of the mosque that is going to be set up in the Cradle of Liberty. The main organizational head for the Islamic Society of Boston was a man named Abdul Rahman Al-Amoudi, who in 2004 was sentenced to 23 years for financing Hamas. So we did our research. We had it cold. We didn't make anything up. We called an emergency meeting of Boston's Jewish leaders. The Federation, the JCRC, the American Jewish Committee, the ADL. We showed them everything that we had. We said this is a direct threat to the Jews of Boston and to the general public, by the way, which, as you'll soon find out, suffered from this. You know what they told us? They told us they needed to be inclusive, to support diversity, to encourage interfaith dialogue. Some of them came to my house to watch on my computer the speeches of Karadari calling for the death of all the world's Jews, who was going to be the likely guide of Boston's Muslim community. Boston had a historically moderate Muslim community, but these people came in to radicalize them. And that was their goal. We have it. We found through a lawsuit, through depositions, we found all of their papers. We found later on who financed them, who they financed, terrorist to terrorist. We showed them how al-Amoudi was an operative. I showed him how al-Amoudi, whose task was to be the moderate Muslim reaching out to Jews for their support. They needed Jewish support because, you see, if the Jews in Boston supported them, then people who weren't Jewish had a right to logically conclude, well, the Jews have the most skin in the game here, and if they're saying they're kosher, they must be kosher. And the moat bridge was let down, and they all came in. And were treated by the Boston Globe and all of the liberal societies in Boston as good, moderate people, when in fact, the man whose job it was to reach out to the Jews, we found, or somebody found, he was writing Jew hatred screeds in Arabic papers. And so people wrote to them and say, well, how can you have a guy who writes that the Jews are so bad, being the ones who, and they said, it didn't happen. It didn't happen. Well, we have it here in Arabic. It's not true. It's a bad translation. So we brought the translation to Harvard's language department, and it wasn't a bad translation. So they finally said, well, he meant the Israelis. Sure. Makes me feel better. So the response from the Jewish community leaders that we were in a froth, you know what they said? They said, Charles, do you want us to fight a Jewish jihad here? I said, no, but you ought to go to the mayor and you ought to tell him, the mayor who we supported, and tell him not to let these folks have a major institution in the hub. If the mayor actually knew who they were, he wouldn't have let them off the plane in Logan Airport, let alone almost give them for free a big plot of land. I said to the Boston Jewish leadership, tell the mayor not to subsidize the purchase of the land for the mosque. I got nothing back. Moral confusion, delusional. They're delusional. They thought that, well, they'll be here, they'll become assimilated, like all the American immigrants. It'll be fine. They were cowards. They didn't want to fight. And then we found in the curriculum, which was taught in that mosque, all kinds of Muslim version of Nazi hate. And now 14 people, I think there's another slide of the 14 people connected with that mosque, have been either killed or on the run, or they're on the run from federal authorities, or they're in jail. And in fact, the Boston Jewish leadership was wrong. Two of the congregants, you could see them, the Tsarnaev brothers right there, were the Boston Marathon bombers. So, gee, guys, you were the ones who told the masses, the citizens of Boston, that they're kosher. Now they blew up the Boston Marathon. Wow. So you should know this story, because I am sure that this happened. I know this happened in other cities, more or less along the same lines. Some Jewish activists, and not just Jewish activists, people who cared about Islamic radicalism, found out what was being planted in their cities. They went to the authorities, often to the Jewish authorities. They were told, we only do diversity, inclusion, and we make nice, because if we make nice, they'll be nice. Great theory for a 33-year-old. The next slide is a book cover, I think, so my former executive director, Ilya Feoktistov, documented this entire episode in a book called Terror in the Cradle of Liberty. The book names names and shames the cowards among Boston's Jewish leadership. It's in Amazon. Go get it. You want to get, this is how it's happened in every city. Next, the public schools. So the left and the Muslim radical organizations figured out a way to make and to insert pedagogically correct lesson plans, anti-Israel curricula in the public schools. It's part of the anti-Western push by the left, and it's part of the anti-Israel campaign by certain Muslim groups. We found it in Newton, Massachusetts, a leafy Jewish suburb of Boston. So this is a good one. Take a look at this. This is a Plo propaganda map, set of maps. It's very famous. You might have seen it all over. It's a set of maps, and it says this was made by the PLO. Okay, so and when they got caught, I'll show you why it's a lie, because this thing was never a Palestinian state. And this thing over here was not the Jews gobbling up Palestine, but this was occupied by Jordan, and this was occupied by Egypt. And nobody said they're occupiers. Nobody raised a BDS against Egypt occupation and Jordanian occupation, only when the Jews took land. Okay, so they backtracked, and they said these maps are for illustrative purposes only. So what did the curriculum in the Newton schools do? It erased the fact that it was PLO in origin and that the map was not real. Okay. The next thing they did was to insert. There's another slide. The Arab World Studies Notebook. Now, the Arab World Studies Notebook is known to was exposed a long time ago by Sarah Stern of Emet, who's wonderful, and the organization is wonderful, as a huge defamational lie against the Jewish people, in that Newton students were getting to read that Jews killed Arab women in Israeli jails. Absolutely untrue. No teacher, we said, how could you? We went to, the grassroots, went to the Newton School Committee and said, how could you let that happen? Well, it's their narrative, right? Have you heard that? It's their narrative. The final thing that I just want to tell you what they did was they doctored the Hamas charter. Now, the Hamas charter, as you should get a copy, is not only against Israel, it is for the murder of every Jew on the planet. But what they did was, doctoring it, they took out every Jew on the planet language, and they made it seem like it was only against Israel. They changed the words. And in the teacher's manual of the Newton Public Schools, it said, listen, we got to have the kids understand that this is not a conflict about religion. It's only about land, right? So they doctored the map to cheat and to make a false impression about what the conflict is all about, because it is not a conflict about land, as anybody who studies this knows. Okay, so Israel, American school children are learning, and by the way, this is all over this is not just Newton, this is all over. And you can't easily stop it because teachers get their lesson plans from the web. And even a good high school principal can't monitor everything that's going on. And all the teachers' unions now, as you know, are lefties, not all, but most. And there is a plethora of high school teachers that are for people of color, and Jews, of course, are not now people of color, even though we are. Half of Israel is Mizrahi. So this is a huge problem, because the next generation we see it now. American school kids learn that Israel is bad. Arab civilization, of course, is absolutely wonderful. Islam is the religion of peace. That's the lesson. So in this, we've been fighting to correct this for years. Grassroots groups led by a 97-year-old woman, Margot Einstein. Fantastic. If there was 100 Margot Einsteins, we would win. So we went to the Federation, and we went to the JCRC, Jewish Community Relations Council, and the ADL and the AJC. And we showed them all of the proofs of what was in the book. And you know what they did? They said, you're exaggerating. And that's what they told the mayor. So the mayor of Newton was told by the Jewish leadership of Newton that there's really no problem here, that we're exaggerating. And wow. I don't know. So recently, another grassroots group that you should become aware of, the American Israeli Council, AIC, took on this problem. They made good progress, but still we have the problem of not being able to know what every teacher teaches. And worse, most recent assault in the high schools is called critical race theory.
Yeah.
Critical race theory, which is now being inserted into school curricula across the country. It was spawned by the Black Lives Matter movement. It teaches that the Jews are not really a minority like the other minorities, like Latinas and feminists and Blacks, but we are white adjacents. That's a new term. I just learned that. They don't say we're white, but we're white adjacents. And that anti-Semitism only comes from the right or is due to the Zionist occupation. So I know this is really, really a problem because it's in every city. The Jews will be swamped, even if if everybody were alerted today, it'd be a hugely serious problem. There are important organizations that are fighting this. I've yet to see a national plan from Jewish community leadership about how to fight it. Okay. Lastly, the Congress. So we're losing the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is the party of the American Jews, 70%, 80% sometimes. We've given them passion, we've given them loyalty, we've given them money. And I'll tell you one incident that says it all. So a little while ago, maybe a couple of years ago, after Rashid Tlaib and Ilhan Omar defamed the Jews, it's about the occupation and it's apartheid and it's about the Benjamins, baby. That's how Jews control the government with our money, our Benjamins. So many Jewish representatives and Jews around the country called for the Democratic Party to condemn them and condemn anti-Semitism. Guess what? They didn't do it. Here's what they did. Instead of condemning anti-Semitism and calling out the anti-Semites by name, right? They passed a resolution condemning every type of hatred, of human hatred since Cain and Abel. They had a laundry list of this long about all the hatreds against this, against that, against this, right? 20 hatreds, and they included anti-Semitism. Now, what they did say to the Jews is what they would never say to the Blacks, who want them to say that Black lives matter, not all lives matter. Black Lives Matter didn't want you to do that to them, right? But they did it to the Jews. They said to us essentially, all lives matter, all hatreds are bad. They wouldn't say anti-Semitism is bad and Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar were anti-Semitic or said anti-Semitic things at least. So when your own party gives you the finger, you should digest this. A friend, Josh Block, who was a Democratic organizer for years and years, calls this moment when they didn't defend us America's Kristallnacht moment. It's a little dramatic, but we should know who is going to protect us. Who is going? Not even the Jewish representatives in Congress, except Zeldin, except one or two, made a fuss that their own party wouldn't say, their own party wouldn't call out the anti-Semites. Jewish leaders are terrified to fight for Jewish interests inside the Democratic Party. So, to sum up, in a way, from the start, Jewish leaders got this terribly wrong. They missed an obvious truth, expressed best by Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. I think there's a slide on Rabbi Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory, right? And he said something that many people knew, but he said it, as he did say things the most brilliant and eloquently. He was the one who said things. Everybody should read his book, his commentary on the Torah every week. It's the most amazing set of books. He said anti-Semitism is a virus that morphs, that whatever is the most heinous crime in any historical era, that's what the Jews are going to be charged with. So under Christianity, we were the Christ killers. Under Islam, we were the deniers of the prophet. When racial science was accepted by society's elites, and it was in the 30s, Jews were vermin. When having a nation state marked people as worthy, Jews were deracinated cosmopolitans. And now that globalism is in, and nation states are inherently racist, the Jews are racist because we have a nation state. So the attack on Israel, of course, is and always was an attack on the Jews. The disproportionate coverage of Israeli conduct is classical anti-Semitism. How did they not know that? How did Foxman not know that? They wanted to think of it as legitimate criticism of Israeli policy. But you don't have legitimate criticism if every day that's your obsessive focus. If every day that's your obsessive focus, it's not, if that's all you're talking about, it's not legitimate criticism. And if you're a Jewish leader and you do not understand that the new anti-Semitism, if you do not understand that Israel has been made the Jew of the nations in the same way that they hated the Talmud and the Torah and Jewish race, now they hate the Jewish state. If you don't know that and you're a Jewish leader, then maybe you should have gotten another job. I don't want to be nasty, but maybe you should have learned to code. So here's where we are now. There's a diagram of threats. After decades of stewing, yeah, there you go, American Jews and poisoned people about Israel and about the people who support Israel. This is what the Jews didn't understand. If Israel is doing bad things, really bad things, and if you are a Jew, most Jews support, so you're a bad person. So this is a perfect storm, a four-front war. Four very powerful ideological sources and movements are aligned against us. The right, over here, the Muslims over here, the left over here, and the activists over here, the left over here. So this is a big problem. There's a perfect storm. And the Jewish community leadership only wants to see the danger coming from the right? They want to tell us that it's the Nazis are the biggest problem. There's no Nazi professors on campus. There aren't Nazis beating up Jews in New York. It's not them. It's not Nazis beating up people who are obviously Jewish in Brooklyn. But why do they want it to be the Nazis? For a couple of reasons. First of all, everybody's against Nazis. There's no internal disagreement about that. And then that's kind of easy. Also, you could stay on the left if you want to tell people the lie that the problem is significantly, mostly from the right, and you don't want to explain to the Jews why can there be left progressives who are against Israel? You don't want to explain that, how that can be. So the four enemies, the right, the left progressive, the Islamists, and the Farrakhan-led Black Jew haters, this was the perfect storm that broke over our heads with the Gaza war propaganda campaign. Jew hatred is now surging and infecting mainstream America. Many American major institutions now believe and promote an anti-Israel narrative, which implies that American Jews and others who support Israel are doing evil. We will be attacked. This can only be seen as a catastrophic defeat. We need new leaders. Apart from the ZOA, we are one of the only groups, I think the only group, who think that there's a moral imperative to speak out publicly and tell the Jews that their leadership has failed. After all, what was their game plan? Their game plan backfired. Their game plan was, we're going to embrace the left. We love the left. We're going to support all of those groups, the feminists, LBGT, Latinos, Blacks, et cetera, et cetera. Well, those are the people who we have spent lots and lots of money and resources and love and support and energy and creativity helping. And they're the ones against us now. They're the ones against us now. So if that was your strategy, if that was your game plan, you lost. We lost. We have placed ads in 16 Jewish papers and in Commentary magazine explaining this failure. And those ads are on the next couple of slides, I think, are the last, not the last three, but the next couple of slides are the ads. So now I'm going to try to wind up here. So to the Lenin had a question. What is to be done? So first of all, between 25 and 30% of the Jewish community is really on our side. They think Israel is really important. They understand a little bit about the Red-Green Alliance, that it's a deadly foe. They understand that the left is abandoning us. Many of these people, the 25 or 30%, are members of great groups, grassroots groups, COA, Camera, Stand With Us, etc. Emet. But there's not a coordinated effort to galvanize all of these people together to challenge, persuade, and pressure our establishment leaders. So a group of us in Boston want to find you, wherever you are, and we want to help you fight in your own communities to challenge Jewish leadership. We can help you. We have strategies, we have advice, we have curricula, we have letters that, we know how to. We want the Jewish community to rise up and to tell its leaders, you bet on the wrong horse, your game plan backfired, you have to change, right? You have to change and put pressure on them. No one is pushing, If you want to be part of this effort, please email me at charlesjacobs123@gmail. Make sure to put the word roundtable in the subject line. That's how I'll know that this is about this. Roundtable. We're at a tipping point. We must get active. Every one of us has to get active. How many years have Jews sat back and sent money to the big organizations thinking or hoping that they would take care of us? They did not. Their game plan was to embrace the left, to fit in with the victims of oppression. Well, as I said, it didn't work. It didn't work. The Jewish leadership game plan is in ruins. They had us bet on the wrong horses. Why would we ever listen to them again? We must, and we can, and we will, if we fight, overcome this. Am Yisrael Chai. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Charles. From the comments, and I've never had as many questions and comments in any webinar, you can see that people are quite innervated by this. I do have some questions I've tried to note from people in the Q&A and in the chat. So let me just jump in. And I will say right up front, people, that we've got 20 minutes. We won't cut off at the hour. Okay, so can you tell us if having the Abraham Accords with 4 countries that are doing positive things with Israel can be helpful, can be leveraged in some way?
Well, if Biden doesn't mess it up, look, the whole thing about the Abraham Accords, whoever did it, whether it was Kushner or Trump or Pompeo, whoever did it, it was the only thing to do to get to peace, which is to bypass the Palestinian issue. Because as long as you had to go through the Palestinian issue to get peace, it wasn't going to happen, at least not in the moment. And so a couple of things came together. The Sunni Arab states are terrified of Iran. The Sunni Arab states noted that Obama flipped on them, against them, and adopted a pro-Iran policy. They were very upset about this. They saw that little Israel, with all of its might, was fighting valiantly and effectively against Iran. They had no place I wouldn't say they had no place to go, but it made sense for them, not because they love Jews, but because, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And Iran is the big enemy. Now, if Biden wants to flip this around, which it seems that he wants to go back to make John Kerry right when he was so wrong, when he said on that famous clip, you can't bypass the Palestinian effort, then who knows if Joe Biden is signaling the Sunnis that he's not going to protect them. And he's signaling the Sunni states that he's not going to protect them against Iran because he's going back to the Iran deal. who knows if they may not have to run to Iran for cover and surrender or accommodation.
This will have happened with Saudi Arabia already, right?
Maybe, yeah.
Israel itself has, I think, presented very poorly on the propaganda PR side, and since probably 30 years as well, and continues to this day to use the language of occupation, West Bank, Palestinian. And now we're looking at what could be a very, talk about an alliance between the left and the Islamists. That's what the Israeli government could be.
Okay, so let me just say a thing about why the Jews don't do good PR, like Daniel Pipes wonders. How could we have been the best soldiers and the Arabs the best publicists? There is a knotty problem inside of Judaism. It's a problem that nobody really, it's a conundrum. Jews agree with anti-Semites that Jewish behavior is cosmologically significant, right? So Jews believe that, religious Jews anyway, believe that we are a holy nation, that we have to act better than the others, that we can't be compared to Saudi Arabia or Sudan or, so it already comes from us that anything we do, it's a Yom Kippur thing. We want to be our Torah perfect self. So when we see other people also criticizing us, and we don't know that they want to hurt us by that, but we think in a silly way, that they're doing what we're doing, which is to make us better by self-criticism and criticism, tough love, that's a big problem. That's a big problem. The only thing is, somebody could say, well, it's Jewish supremacism. We think we're, the only thing is to say, compared to what? Jews are cruel? Compared to what? People care about the number of Arabs that have been killed by Jews. I have a nice picture that is a pie chart. And this much on the pie chart is how many Arabs were killed by Jews in conflicts, right? The rest of the pie chart, by 400-fold, 1,000-fold, is how many Arabs killed Arabs. Does anybody care? No. Arab lives matter if Jews kill them. We've heard that before in the local.
I think it's the same with the data on Black lives.
Yeah, right.
You referenced a number of go-to organizations that we need to know and should know and support. Are there sympathetic media? Are you finding there are any mainstream media that also have the story right? And I will stop for a minute and just say that in Canada, in the last few weeks and through this last battle with Hamas, I think the National Post did a remarkable job in standing up for Israel, but that's the extent of it.
I read something by Barbara Kay.
Yes.
Okay. Wow. She wrote something the other day. It was like one of the best pieces I've ever seen anywhere. So you kol hakavod.
Yes, she's often in the National Post, the Epoch Times, which I'll promote here. I'll plug them, Times, right. And Post Millennial.
Right. There are individual journalists. Even the Boston Globe has Jeff Jacoby, and even the New York Times, I don't know how they keep him there. They still have Fred Stevens. Barry Weiss had to leave. By the way, she's doing incredible work trying to rally classic liberals against the progressives. She's an incredible person. And that's a fight that's extremely important to us. I don't know, other than that, the right-wing press is good. Better.
Is the failure of leadership something that you spoke about going to donors, for example, using even that language of failed leadership seems to be, I'm assuming, seen as accusative, divisive, unhelpful. How could it be approached by people who don't want to drive the wedge further but want to bring about change? Okay, so there are many ways that you can, first of all, I consider this to be an internal discussion in a way. So we have to understand, and that's why we have to talk about it in this way. We have to understand precisely what they did and how they made these mistakes and why they made, if we don't understand why they made these mistakes, I don't know how we're going to turn it around. There are many ways to approach a problem: persuasion, conviction, gentle pushing. But
But, I believe that there ought to be carrots and sticks. I believe there ought to be huge pressure, outraged pressure about what they did to us. And then let other nicer people go in and explain to them, maybe you really ought to declare an emergency. Maybe you really ought to stand up to all of those left-wing groups that betrayed us and have real hard sit downs with them. Maybe you ought to do these other things. But the question is, they need to be addressed. And the question of failed leadership, no matter how you phrase it, needs to be on the top of what we do. Because the grassroots, can only keep the fingers in the dikes. Unless we turn around leadership or change it, it's going to be very hard to think of a way that we can win.
I will say that for those Canadians listening, that there has been a call by the 4 big established organizations to demand the federal government call an emergency meeting, a summit, to come up with an action plan. And I think regardless of where one sits ideologically, it's the first time we've seen even those 4 working on something that might serve everybody. And
well, they better have more than declarations. They better have police on the streets. They better have training for Jews to understand who their enemies are. That's let's see if you get to that stage. Besides, I'm very happy they want to do a declaration. Let's see what comes later.
You talked about the college professors and the administrators, which I really appreciated, because I think they seem to be to have really deafened ears. They're not listening. But I think that the problem is that the guys who are now the professors and the administrators were all educated 30 years ago by leftist professors. There hasn't been any movement in the academy to change the rhetoric. Do you see something the community
can? Well,
can
what happened was the classic liberal people, the professors that you and I went to school under and learned so beautifully with, they were nice people. And so when a Marxist came to apply for the department, they said, well, let's let him in because then we'll have a dialogue. We'll see. All right. Now, once so many Marxists, a tipping point came, and the Marxists did not have that point of view about let's let in people with other points of view. So they just locked out everybody else, and the institution has been taken over, hollowed out. It's an enemy of democracy. It's an enemy of America. It's an enemy of all the races. They're trying to re-tribalize America, to tribalize America. There's not going to be e pluribus unum anymore. I mean, it's a disaster. I mean, if I had a kid going to college now, I would think very hard about an alternative.
Yeah, send him to be an electrical engineer or a plumber.
Or, well, I know, there are a couple of places that are good, but you'd have to, few and far between. There'll be a reaction against this, I think. One organization I forgot to mention that I really like, and I mentioned a few, and I'm going to get in trouble because there's a bunch, and I don't have a long list, but Club Z in California teaches Jewish high school kids, how to defend rhetorically. Fantastic.
And they're here. Yes, I totally agree. And they are one of our sponsors, and they're here. So thank you for adding that. Reaching the young people is not going to be easy. They're all influenced by progressives, and they're challenged by their friends and by non-Jews and Jews. Do you have any suggestions? It's almost like they need to be deprogrammed.
Almost. There was a deprogramming effort in the 60s when, Hare Krishna people captured our children and made them crazy. Outside of that, we've lost a generation because we let the other side get into our kids' heads without a fight, without much of a fight, without a smart, efficient, effective fight. And I have to say that I don't know, nobody knows how to get leftists not to be left. It's a religion. It's, people become secular, human beings want to make meaning in life, want to have meaning in life. And so if it's not going to be God, if it's not going to be Christianity or Judaism, it's going to be utopianist Marxism. And that's what has grabbed them. They don't want to just be practical people. I mean, all humankind seeks meaning in life. And they got their meaning in life thing in there. And we have failed in many ways to keep our kids where I mean, there people write books about this all the time. Is it that society is too wealthy, life is too easy, too many choices, whatever? But I fear that the only thing that will change some people is when they see blood on the streets. I see it now. I see it now. I have friends a woman who belongs to a left-wing Jewish group. That group last week split in half because the ones couldn't stand the anti-Semitism anymore and are starting to question what the left is doing, not fighting for the Jews.
I think it's
and I think that's the kind of thing that will happen.
What about the extreme leftist Jewish groups? And it would look, in Canada at least, that every BDS activity is led by a Jewish entity or person. So the big one here is Independent Jewish Voices, and they attract money. Why? Because they promote themselves as a social justice and human rights organization, so they can get federal grants, right? Social justice is the end words.
Listen, Jews are very talented people. When they do bad things, they do it very well. So it's not a surprise. All throughout Jewish history, Jews under pressure of the burden of being Jewish have fled to the other side. This is not new. They have simply fled to the other side, except this time they don't have to say, I'm not Jewish. This time they can keep the word Jewish in there. And it's much harder. If they said, I'm converted to, I hate Jews. They don't need to say that. And it's very effective for left-wing Jewish groups to say, we're pro-Jewish, we're for peace. Look, we made a film about the J Street Challenge was the name of the film.
Right.
Avi Goldwasser.
It was here.
Yeah, it was, and it's a huge problem.
Is there a place for progressive Zionists? Whatever that means.
Well, I know there's a guy in England.
That's what they are.
There's a guy in England called David Hirsch. I mean, there are honest progressive Zionists. I just don't, and there's a place for them. I don't know that they're going to win inside the progressive house. It'll be interesting to see, and it's a good question. I have to go see where he is, David Hirsch. Have they been thrown out already? I mean, if things are going like they have been going, Zionists are thrown out of the left. About the Women's March and all of that. So, there is a place theoretically you could be a left-wing Zionist. Why not? But your left-wing friends aren't going to like you.
I'm going to accept it. One of the questions that was asked is about immigration. When Trump tried to limit certain countries from immigration from certain countries, of course, he was called every dirty name in the book. We had the same schism here. The conservatives wanted to, while they were in power, give priority to persecuted peoples, which might have been Christians and Yazidis, and they were called racist for labeling anybody. And so the majority of people were Muslim. Is it appropriate to look at immigration still because it's increasing and it seems to contribute to Jew hatred?
For sure. Look, I mean, here's the scandal. There's a group called HIAS, the Hebrew Immigration Aid Society, which way long ago did magnificent, heroic work getting Jewish immigrants who had no place else to go to America. Well, that clientele kind of dried up. Why give up a good thing when you have it? Keep the conveyor belt coming, sprinkle it with anybody else who is an immigrant. Then you're gonna, the salaries keep getting paid and the kudos keep coming in and the federal government. Well, they are importing Syrians, refugees. Well, anybody who does a study of Syrian schools knows that every Syrian in the country, because there's only government-controlled schools, there's not a non-government, right. Their curriculum teaches Jew hatred. So does HIAS say, gee, maybe we ought to vet these people before they come in here to see whether or not they hate Jews or America or women or democracy or Christians. They refuse to do that. They only vet these people for past terrorist ties, but they don't vet them for the bomb in the heart. And that's the bomb that matters a lot. And so this is really a problem. And HIAS did that, and it's terrible. I just want to say one more thing about Jewish Democrats. Jewish Democrats who are still pro-Israel have the biggest fight left. And I pray for them. They really need to step up their game and to be brave, and we should support them like crazy to fight against the anti-Semites and the anti-Zionists inside the Democratic Party. It's very, very hard. It's just like the fight that Barry Weiss is making against progressives from a liberal base. The Jewish Democrats could learn a lot from her. I wish them well. I wish them well. I don't know, that's the fight we ought to watch. But if they can't get their own party to call out Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, that should show them how much work they have to do yet.
Those women keep getting rewarded, right?
Of
they
course.
get recognition and promotion. Is Omar now chairing a major committee?
Listen, and Joe Biden went out to the tarmac and embraced Tlaib and said she's great and all of this. I call them the jihad squad, not just the squad, it's the jihad squad. They're rooting for Hamas, says it's doing a jihad. And if you're for Hamas, you're for killing every Jew on the planet. That's what they're for.
Okay, so you said something about that is really important. And everything I've been writing and saying recently, I've been emphasizing that people need to read the 36 articles of the Hamas Charter. So I'm saying it again. I think it's also unbelievable that the Jewish establishment never talked about the Charter, never publicized it, never spoke of it, never wrote about it. And only in the last 6 weeks with this last attack coming from Hamas, is it even being mentioned? No, I mean, I think the Jewish community would pay $10,000 and publish the damn thing, and maybe people would wake up.
Well, you have all the Newton school teachers who will doctor it and put it in the curriculum like they did. Yeah, I mean, people don't want to see jihadists in there as something to deal with, because the only thing you can do with the jihadist is to defeat him. And all these people are accommodationists, diplomats, soft power, conflict averse. So, if you're conflict averse and you don't want to see somebody who might attack you, right, then blind yourself.
I've called it Jewish positive passivity. We don't want to have a struggle. We don't want to be seen to be aggressive.
Yeah,
it would seem. Well, there have been other questions. We could be here for hours. I'll just make one more from a close friend of our organization, John Thompson, who's Christian, who says, are there not more Christians, I say righteous Christians, with whom we should form allyship, and how do we find them?
Well, absolutely. Rabbi Sachs, before he died, said there have been two modern miracles. One was the creation of the state of Israel, the recreation of the state of Israel. And the other miracle is Christian Zionism. Whoever would have known, for what we grew up with and what we, my in-laws, that's all, of loving memory, were Holocaust survivors. And when I first came to them and said, there are Christian Zionists, there are Christians who are fighting for Israel, it just didn't, it didn't compute. They couldn't, until I introduced them. So I think that the Christians are our best friends, and we ought to be the best friends of the Christians. I want to mention one more thing. This Saturday in Omaha, Nebraska, the Nigerian Christian community, Nigerian American Christian community, is going to be holding a march against the jihad slavery of Black people in Africa by Muslims. Okay.
Finally.
Go to freenigerianslaves.org and you could see it. We ought to be for them. And it's, by the way, the Christians in the Middle East are the ones who have been most jihaded and most massacred. I mean, they used to be, 16, 18, 20% of the Middle East. Now they're hardly
3%. In some places, 3%.
In some places, 3%. So we have to ally with our friends. We have to ally with our friends. Tell John Thompson, God bless him.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this, Charles. It's astonishing information and what we need to know.
Just one more thing, if I could just do one more thing to end. So if you want to really do something about Jewish leadership, this is focused narrow on persuading and convincing and pressuring and begging Jewish leadership. And you want to work with us, send me an email, subject line, roundtable. to charlesjacobs123@gmail.com. And I want to thank you. You know, Andrea, I just met you a month ago on the phone. I hadn't realized what incredible stuff you have done. If we had 100 of you like Margot Einstein's, we'd be way ahead.
Thank you so much. And I do encourage everybody to follow us at the Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation and to be in touch if you want to be involved. We are pushing for the development and expansion of End Jew Hatred as a grassroots movement. We are prepared to take action. We are partnering with organizations in the US that are developing End Jew Hatred, organizations like Club Z. And I think I'll put together a list of organizations and both Jewish and non-Jewish that we should all support and be aware of. And Charles, I'll depend on you to get some of that information.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and have a good day. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.